Thank you, Peggy. We're now going to get started on the first section of the morning where we're actually talking about the challenge that we have with parking and congestions. It's my pleasure to introduce Elaine Breeze from Summerhill Apartment Communities. Elaine has been with us from the beginning in the Home for All work, and she's going to be talking to you about the value of neighborhood input, and we're going to be thinking about it that way. So, Elaine.
Good morning. Thank you for giving me the opportunity to be here today. It's a great turnout. It's a tough topic, candidly. For those of you that aren't familiar with Summerhill, we're a local privately owned development company. We've been in business since 1976. We've built about 7,000 homes, ranging from multifamily rental through mixed use, townhomes, custom single-family homes. Here in the county, we have active projects in South San Francisco, San Bruno, Burlingame, Foster City, and Redwood City. And my perspective today, it comes from working in infill residential projects, the P word. And that's in single-family neighborhoods, commercial districts, and even in industrial areas in transition. And every neighborhood is different with different concerns. I'm going to focus on the value of neighborhood engagement, and review a few best practices for that engagement when new development is coming into an existing neighborhood. First, learn as much as you can about the neighborhood, the existing parking and circulation conditions, and acknowledge that as the baseline. Visit the neighborhood at different times of day, different days of the week. Are there existing uses impacting others? What are the traffic patterns? And when you meet with neighbors, ask them. Unfortunately, existing conditions might already have them upset, but it's at least good to know. For example, we started working on an apartment project next to an established single-family neighborhood, and the immediate cry was, "You are not going to have enough parking." Well, come to learn that neighborhood was being impacted by cars from the existing use we were proposing to replace, as well as existing frustration with people parking in the neighborhood and taking Uber to the airport, and commercial trucks being parked for extended periods of time. So we established the baseline. Second, recognize that the neighbors will always know their neighborhoods better than you. And you listen to them, and you may get a better designed project. For example, we had there's a shadow here. For example, we had a neighborhood meeting for a mixed-use project on El Camino, and a resident pointed out that our residents were heading south and would have to make a U-turn, which would make them go further away to get into our garage. Well, we thought it was better to stay away from the existing neighborhood, but then they explained it would just further congest the route they were taking home. So we redesigned the whole ground level to accommodate the change, and we have now a better design and happy neighbors. Similarly, you might find yourself bridging the city's goals with neighborhood concerns. On another project on El Camino, a city adopted a bike and pedestrian plan with a connection from a single-family neighborhood through our site onto El Camino. We thought it was a great idea, but the neighbors were fearful that our residents would park on their streets. So we dedicated a trail easement so that in the future the connection could still be implemented. Third, try to design appropriate mitigations for your project based on this input, so receiving that information. And as I mentioned, in many cases, neighborhoods are already impacted by existing conditions and are concerned about those conditions, and then what are you going to bring with your new project? But neighbors can help you think of mitigations that you might have not thought about, and you can also help them understand how to address their pre-existing conditions. So for example, we were at a neighborhood meeting when residents expressed concerns about speeding in a nearby street. It wasn't on our site. Staff was not aware, the city staff wasn't aware of the concern. We called them, they performed a stop sign warrant study and subsequently installed a stop sign. This before our project got built. In another case, residents expressed concerns about speeding, again, on a nearby street, not at our project. But through our project, we offered to plant street trees and traffic calming signage and striping to address their concern. And oftentimes we find neighbors are just frustrated, and if we can help them find ways to get to solutions, it might be something that's just creating a communication line with the city staff. And then lastly, to provide bridging information so that neighbors can be informed and educated in areas that maybe they're not as familiar with and have limited exposure. So one example is educating them on parking design, including things, the fact like they they think of single-family homes, the garages are used for storage and they park in the driveway, right? Or they park on the street. But in multifamily housing, parking is only used for parking. In other words, it can't be filled up with it like a neighbor's garage. This is a contextual understanding that is really key. Another is to share market trends to find a common ground. So for example, our apartment residents prioritize walkability to transit and fun places to hang out. And they're owning fewer and fewer cars every single year. In fact, we surveyed recently one 300-unit building. There were 18 units that owned no cars. But as little as 5 years ago, I would say that, and the neighbors would say, oh yeah, but they're still gonna have 2 cars. Now, when I might still have people say that, but I might have others that would agree, and they say, well, actually, my son really doesn't drive much. Or, yeah, my daughter and her husband, they do share 1 car. So finding that common ground is really important. And then finally, I think local data or context is very educational and informative for people. For example, we have commissioned parking occupancy surveys of like-kind projects nearby that neighbors are familiar with, and provided that data to show real-time local demand for parking. Similarly, local context can help with showing real-time data on something like traffic generation. We had a new single-family project. We were in the middle of an existing single-family neighborhood, and the neighbors were concerned about congestion. So the city found a like-kind street in the neighborhood with a similar amount of homes and counted cars. And the results and the low traffic counts were meaningful to the neighbors. So in conclusion, we find that neighborhood input is valuable in developing new housing, and responding to it is critical for gaining their support. And it is also valuable for providing this bridging information to educate neighbors as we pursue new housing opportunities. Thank you.
Thank you, Elaine. Our next speaker is going to be Ann Chang from Transform.
Good morning, everyone. Thanks for being here. This is definitely a juicy topic that will continue with us for many years, I'm sure. So I'm Ann Chang. I'm the interim co-executive director at Transform. And I'm here to share with you my 20 years of experience of being a planner and 12 years at Transform of working on this exact topic. So for those who don't know, Transform is a nonprofit. We're based in the Bay Area. We've been around 22 years now, and our mission is to promote climate protection and social justice, working on the nexus of housing and transportation, land use and transportation at multiple scales, local, regional, and statewide. And one of our main initiatives is all about this, creating more homes with less driving or less traffic and congestion. And we believe through the tools that we've provided and the programs we support, we can shape and influence the creation of 50,000 new homes, and by building less car parking, save $2.5 billion, and that would all result in 185 million fewer miles per year. So really glad to see San Mateo is ahead of the curve and leading the region. So my main 5 tips of my experience that I'll cover are, number 1, framing the opportunity cost of parking. Number 2, showing all kinds of data, as Elaine was alluding to. Explain how important it is to know all the transportation options that are coming to your community. This is constantly changing and churning. Examples of success stories, real projects, real money behind, financed and built projects, and providing credible, free, and easy-to-use tools. So, number 1 is opportunity cost. So, I think one big takeaway is everyone knowing that the cost of parking is not free, even though the experience is most of the time free. $50,000 for just 1 car parking space, not including the land, operations, and maintenance. In your packets, actually, you'll see there's a screenshot from our parking database where, again, you can get actual data of real projects, named down to who owns it, who operates it, what the rents are, what the unit mix are, in case you don't happen to have that data ready to go. So knowing the data and kind of highlighting how the cost of a parking space is so much more expensive than perhaps maybe striping a bike lane or filling in just a segment of sidewalk that's missing. Often you can do much more with pedestrian bicycle infrastructure, and people don't realize that cost difference. So number 2 is the data. So please do look at that. In the sheet, I've actually customized a report for you all to focus on transit neighborhoods specifically. So again, like similar projects and place types, and you can filter this by county, by city, and a whole range of factors. Essentially shop for the data that's going to work best for your needs. And we're also collecting more data, so if I'm really excited to connect with you all to see if we can keep expanding this database to make it really easy and effective. And actually, one of the anecdotes here is recently I heard from East Palo Alto council member who said, "And I use the database actually live in a meeting. Actually, you can put into your phones database.greentrip.org or on your laptop, and as you're in a project meeting, as it's going live, I invite you to pull it up in real time." And he was like, "I was able to find right there on the dais an actual project and bring the data into the conversation and invite everyone else to look at it all at the same time." So we're constantly looking for examples of you all using it, so please let us know if that can help you. So number 3 is knowing the other options. So one of the biggest secret deals in town is, you may not know, is bulk transit passes. So you all heard of Costco, right? When you buy in bulk, you get a discount. So same goes with Caltrain and Samtrans. Over the years, we've been able to encourage both the agency to add a bulk transit discount pass. So actually, Belmont is one of the first that we're aware of that made use of this. They purchased for the Artisan Crossing project. They're committing to 40 years of free Caltrain passes. So that's incredible, right? And the beauty is that the agency has already come up with the pricing structure, so it's essentially 96% discounted. If you buy an annual pass, it's about $200 versus right now a monthly pass can be up to $500 to $600. So that's one thing. Bike share, car share, all of these new modes of getting around are changing. E-bikes are out there. So one thing I found personally, as having been a council member myself in El Cerrito, where I grew up, a lot of folks who come to meetings actually are used to the way they get around, but they're not aware. They just don't see day to day all the different ways. And even car share is becoming old and outdated, and there's more and more. So being on top of that, knowing what the options are, and bringing that into the conversation. So great examples. I spoke to Artisan Crossings, great one right down the way, but this is one of our proud projects, Platinum and Zero Parking certified in San Jose, right next to Diridon Station. And what they did was provide this fantastic buffet of options. So bike parking, not just on the ground level, but within units on each level of the property, transit passes, shared smart cars, bike share memberships, transit screen lobby in the lobby, and shared electric cargo bikes. So this project is breaking ground soon this year, and we were able, because of this package, they went from 34 units to 56 units. So more examples on our website of Green Trip certified developments across the region. Please do check that out. And all our projects have invested private capital of $26 million in public transit. So the examples there are there for you to dig into. And also cities, if you need examples as you're getting into the policy conversation, in addition to the projects, these are all agencies and cities that have started to adopt the Green Trip way. So tools, in addition to the parking database, what I want to introduce you to is the Green Trip Connect tool. And if you could raise your hand if you've heard of Green Trip Connect. So, wow, fabulous, a bunch. So not surprising, you guys are the A students. So I would love to hear how you are using it, but for example, the way we designed this is, we wanted to level the information playing field and create a traffic, parking, climate calculator tool that anyone could use, and especially community members. So this is the only tool that exists to date that was built from the outset with those three stakeholders in mind, but especially community. As you'll see, traffic models often are built by consultants and engineers, and they go to town on all the bells and whistles that work for them, but at the end of the day, even if they're free, they're just, who's gonna spend time to really understand it? And so we did the best we could to make a really easy to use tool. Again, you can put it into your phone right now, connect.greentrip.org, and you can actually model a project that you're looking at in your own neighborhood, and you pick a parcel and you start entering the variables in. And the beauty of it is that once you've created a project scenario, you can generate a URL, universal, actually I forget what that means, but URL link, a hyperlink, and share that to your community group, to the developer, to your council members, and say, hey, look, your project might have this much parking or units and affordability, but we want to see even deeper affordability or add these transit passes, car share, and look how much more, how much less traffic it'll generate, how much less greenhouse gases, and it actually calculates the savings in parking as well that's predicted. So definitely invite you all to use it, and we're collecting stories about folks who are using it live in their neighborhoods, in their communities. This is example actually, built in is a script to directly make it as easy as possible for someone who's never been to a project meeting and is wondering what they should say and how they can support a project, and go straight from there. So so join us, please use the tool. I think what's great also is that it's credible, it's been peer reviewed by the Strategic Growth Council, and it's informed by the California Household Travel Survey data. So it kind of bridges this both credible as well as easy to use and accessible. So please sign up. I'll pass around a clipboard. We'd love to come to your whatever additional local meetings that are happening so that we can give you hands-on experience and really amp up the voices to support all this housing that we need. Thank you.
Thank you, Ann. Next, I'd like to welcome Serlene Grant from Envirocom Communication Strategies, and she's going to talk about the voice of neighborhood interests.
Good morning. I'm glad to be here. Oh wow, this is a full room. Thank you all for being here. So as I've been introduced in the packet, I do community relations and public outreach for housing construction and community development projects. And I usually get called in anticipation of there being some opposition to a project, not everybody being on board, finding a way to present this project to a community. And I consider my work that, it's funny that today is called bridging. I consider myself to be the proverbial bridge builder between those who are sponsoring a project and those who are supposed to have a gain from the project. And a lot of my work is around, it just starts with planning, civic engagement, and public involvement. I mean, I actually have a plan, and I would hope that any of you who are working on these kinds of projects have a plan of engaging the community. So this morning, just real quickly, I want to talk about some of the strategies that lead to shared success, what may be some of the triggers that will trigger opposition to your project, and what to do in response or not do in response. Just real brief, because I could probably go on long and long. First of all, let's just say that your project is something that's going to benefit the community. So a lot of times when projects come into the community, what the community sees is a developer, a wealthy developer coming in, making himself or herself or the company more wealthy at the expense of the community. So you have to come in and frame it so that it's not a you and them, but a we. So we try to find the benefit. So in doing that, developing your message, ask yourself, who are you doing this for? What is your end gain, and who benefits? Why is this needed? Why is this project needed? And not a big scoping conversation. I'm not talking about the EIR, why is this needed? I'm talking about just you're sitting down at the bar with your friend and you're writing, you know, if I could do this, I could change this and make this happen. Just the conversational, why are you doing this? If you're the developer, the policymaker, the elected official, the transportation engineer, just in the back of your head have an authentic conversation about why this project is and who it benefits, who is the community, what is the community. That becomes your elevator speech. That becomes the thing that you bring to the community when you're talking to people. You're saying, we're building 40 units of housing to achieve a goal of whatever the gap is, to fill the gap is, to say that there's a strategy here that 5 people in this community can live in this housing, or whatever it is, but bring it to a heart level. I hope I'm making this clear, and not the, penciling out level. Communities don't care about how it pencils, because how it pencils is going to help the developer, the owner. It's not going to help the community unless you explain to them how it's going to help. So defining shared vision. So once you have, why you're doing it, identify, I think it was Elaine, right? I think it was Elaine said, go talk to the community. Identify key stakeholders. Go talk to them with people and find out what their need is, what they think about what you're planning to do. Find the neighbor who's been around the longest. Find the person who's the community leader, and it might not be the pastor of the church, which is always good, but it could be the person who just volunteers in the school a lot, and people go there because they know that that person knows everything that's going on in the community. Then in this process, you'll find out what some of the concerns might be, and you'll actually find that maybe they want the same things you want. They want modern housing, they want new housing, but they're concerned about, will it be safe? When you bring density into a community and somebody sees a 5-story going up, they just think of a big 5-story shadow box or something. They don't understand that maybe it could be designed for safety, or it could be designed for public access, or it could be designed not to be a wall in the community, to be a joining place in the community. There's a lot of things you can do, and a lot of conversations that can be had that can find the shared value in what you want to do and what they're looking for. Then there's the issue of most communities. There's the long-term resident. My parents have lived, my mother at this point has lived in Redwood City for 68 years. She's one of the original people on the street, all right? The house was built by my father. There's a lot happening on that corner. So when things happen, she's real mellow. She's real mellow, but she's got history. She's got history. So you got the long-term person, and then you have the short-term person. And what happens there? What's that culture conflict? So you have to talk to people, because there's always issues of, what's now being called culture keeping. Because in this era of gentrification, people are really afraid of what's going to happen to their communities. They're afraid of the change in the community characteristics. How the architecture might change. They're concerned about what the community assets might be. You bring a whole bunch of new housing in. Where do the kids go to school? What happens? Are you contributing anything to the school? And yeah, the city planners know you have some kind of impact fee, but maybe the residents don't know. So there's a lot of education that has to go on. And part of this education, that's my next point. As I said, you start with a civic engagement plan, a community involvement plan. My theory is to always start with some meetings to educate people, to get people on the same page. And so there's some basics that you have to do. Make the meetings inclusive. It depends on where you are, but chances are if you're in South San Mateo County, you're going to need some, depending on where the land is, but you'll probably need translation services. Make things make meeting places accessible. Come to where they are. You come to the local community center, come to the local church. Don't ask people to come to you. You go to where they are. Find an hour and a time that's good for the meeting. And when you have this meeting, read the newspaper, go online, do something to find out what has happened in the last 24 hours in this community. Because if a kid was just hit at an intersection on a bike, you have to start the meeting a whole different kind of way than if that didn't happen, okay? So find out what has gone on. Find out what's going on with international news. If you're in East Palo Alto and something has happened with the Pacific Islander community somewhere, and they're feeling it, you need to honor that. You need to have someone come up and say a blessing to the room, honor their traditions, do something. So that's making a meeting inclusive. And that will kind of be like bridge span number 1. Now bridge span number 2, like I said, is like I try to make sure that we have the first meeting is to educate. And a lot of that is around language, and it was touched on a little bit before, and I shared this story with the planners for this convening, that we get caught up in our own vocabulary. Architects, they're drawing and designing, they have beautiful drawings, and they're bringing them out, and this has happened. A whole meeting where the guy talked about the beautiful housing, the architect, I shouldn't say the guy, the architect talked about the beautiful housing on podium, with podium parking. Blah, 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 and we'll have gardens, and we'll do this, and we'll do that, and podium parking. Well, it was in an African-American community, and in that particular community, podium was the thing like this, that you stand behind and give a speech. So they had no clue what he was talking about. And finally, when we got to question and answer, someone was brave enough to say, what is podium parking? So think about things. I mean, there's a glossary that's really handy today, because another time, another place, there was a presentation on capital improvements, and they were talking about money being spent to create complete streets. And, you know, the street is complete. What's up? The street is complete. The kids ride their bicycles down the street. We walk down the street. The street is complete. And so, again, good deal of the meeting happened. A person came to me afterwards and shared with me, but I don't understand. The street is complete, right? They're not fixing the street. They're not paving it. So, again, a lost opportunity. Other topics to take time for, even in a room like this is a well-positioned audience. You guys have resources, but there are things that probably some of you wouldn't really understand, have to look up. And so if you're just going to the general public, things like tax credit financing, and especially if you're talking about it within the terms of affordable housing with people who live in subsidized housing, because somewhere, some along the lines, I've been in enough of these, people think it's going to change their rent structure. And then that becomes a fear factor. And then you have to negate the fear factor through education before you can do anything else. Cost of items, the cost of parking spaces. No one thinks a parking space adds $50,000 to the cost of a project. That reality, why would a blank area of land cost that much money? I mean, you know, so no one does it. Density bonuses, the language around medium incomes and average incomes, all that has to take time to be digested. And then interacting with the community. These are a couple of examples I just want to share. It's kind of trendy, especially in the Bay Area, the dot-commers, to dress like you don't have money, right? To kind of wear blue jeans and a t-shirt and go to the meeting and talk with the policy people, and that's really cool. That's good. That's comfortable. But given your audience sometimes, that can be off-putting because you are in authority, and it's kind of like how you present yourself. So this example I want to give, and I'm really going to be really generic with my examples. 'cause there was a recent public meeting where the project owner was there, and he already has hair longer than his collar, and he came in with blue jeans and a t-shirt, and he really just looked like he got through playing Frisbee with the dog, all right? And he came into the meeting, and he wanted to do this project on a very heavy boulevard next to a school, and parking and traffic, so the community's like, oh, we're not having this. And he wanted to do something like 70 units when it was zoned for 30. So it was 5 stories, and he just had this crazy plan. And so there was a lot of resistance to him. And, you know, he was a white male, and it was a predominantly white audience, and they just felt, you could see it. They just felt like, oh, who is he? Why is he here? He doesn't even care enough about how he looks. How is he going to care about our properties? There's a lot of projection, you know, that first impression thing. So just be mindful of it. I'm not saying you got to be suited and tied and everything, but just be mindful of how you're presenting and the culture that you're presenting to. Black, white, other. There are rules. So also, another thing he did was he had his EIRs and so forth, and people had real questions about real numbers. And he had those numbers, and he had them. But he would tell people, look them up, look them up. Well, you can just answer the question. They're not going to look it up. It's technical. That's too much work. And then the other story I want to share with you is that sometimes the opposition comes from someone who's not in the room or not in the community. And this is also a true story. There are several parcels around in the Bay Area where there's like a big box of Best Buy or something on one end of the field, and there's shopping, and on the other side there's housing. So this was one of those where the developer wanted to build about 30 units of affordable mixed-use housing with retail on the bottom on the edge of one of these big shopping centers that had Best Buy, CompUSA, furniture store, whatever. And the city was for it. The neighbors were for it. The developer got the land from a nearby church. Everybody in the community was for it. The community really needs this housing. They really needed this affordable housing. And the corporate offices of the Best Buy is one, of the big boxes said, no, we need the whole field of parking. We need everything we have, because when people get the big computers and the TVs and stuff, they need to be able to open their doors and put it in. Now, they weren't taking the parking. They just wanted to have rights, access rights and easement rights, and share the parking. So the lawyers were talking. This is when I kind of shifted from consultant to advocate. And you can find anything you need on the internet. So I found the names and contact information for board members, corporate board members. And I wrote a nice little email about how would they like their corporation to be known for preventing affordable housing being built in a particular neighborhood. Things started changing a different way. So the moral of the story, you can find anything you want on the internet. But no, it's really just about trying to make a project work. So in closing, finally, I just want to say, really getting a project through is an old school courtship. It's about relationship building. It's kind of like, if you don't bring me flowers in the beginning, how do I know that you'll do what you say you're going to do at the end? How come the women were the first to chuckle? If you're going to dress up and present, if you're not going to dress up and present your best now, how do I know I'm going to get quality later? Establish the key relationships with leaders in the community, inform and educate people, provide information clearly in plain language. It would be nice to co-plan and partner with some of the community members in making your decisions and presentations. Define, as I said, and promote the actual mutual benefit, and deliver the product that you promised so that you can come back the next time. Thank you for the opportunity and letting me share.
Thank you, Sirlene. Now I'd like to introduce Emily Beach, Vice Mayor of the City of Burlingame, and she's going to share some information about the effectiveness of community engagement.
Thank you. I appreciate that. Good morning, everybody. What an honor to be batting cleanup for such a talented, women-powered panel. Isn't that pretty awesome? Thank you. I'm anti-podium, so I'm going to stand here as long as that works for everybody. And thank you for sticking around for this part of the panel. So good morning. I am delighted, if we could, you guys have the slides, if you could advance the next slide, to share with you a little bit about a project in Burlingame called Village at Burlingame. And it is our first 100% affordable housing project in Burlingame on public land. And thank you. If all goes as planned, it's already through planning process, it will break ground this fall. And we are very, very excited to share some of the story about this particular project. But why Burlingame up here? Many of you here in this room are doing affordable housing projects in your communities on public land. You're doing similar things. Why Burlingame? I think there's 3 good reasons today. Number 1, this is our first, so there's always lessons learned when a community goes through it for the first time. Number 2, we are a community like many of yours, but fiercely protective of our quality of life, the character of the community, and so the community engagement process had to be handled in a very careful way in Burlingame. And the planning process actually went quite smoothly, so we'd like to share some takeaways there. And number 3, and probably the most important reason we're here today sharing our story, is we had the very good fortune that the project went through the planning process almost perfectly coordinated with the first Home for All pilot project. The community, Burlingame talks together about housing with our help from partners from Home for All. And I'll tell you a little bit more about that timing, but how powerful that was and how that helped smooth the wheels. So the planning process was one thing. It really began in earnest in February of 2018, but the story actually begins way, way back in 2010. And in Burlingame in 2010, the council at that time approved a downtown-specific plan. And part of the downtown-specific plan was looking at our downtown and seeing that we had a lot of surface parking lots. And how could we possibly park more efficiently than have a bunch of surface parking lots? How could we create more open space? And how could we create additional opportunities for housing and ideally some affordable housing? Because I think what we've all learned through this process is it's through housing that you can create vitality in a downtown when you have a walkable downtown with people living there rather than just restaurants and storefronts. You really need people living and using those services. So back in 2010, there was a vision for what can we do with these surface parking lots. And before I go any further, I have to give credit where the real credit is due. I'm up here today sharing with you some of the story here, but the credit truly belongs to visionary and bold leaders in the city back in 2010 and who started to formulate that, and that's a few members that are currently on council. Certainly, they had a bold vision for how are we going to address these issues. And they began, before it became sort of in vogue to do these kind of projects, they were thinking about it and put the RFP out for this project way back in 2014 and partnered with a developer in 2015. And that is we had 3 former mayors and current council members, Michael Brownrigg, he's here today, Ann Keegren, and Ricardo Ortiz. And I think we should give them a round of applause for their vision. And of course, also we have 2 staff members who are here today who saw this project through from the beginning, our Director of Community Development, Kevin Gardner, and Ruben Huron, one of our other project planners who saw this project through. If you guys can raise your hands. Saw you here earlier. And then of course, I have to acknowledge our incredible mayor, Donna Colson, who is one of the founding members of Home for All, done amazing work in housing, bringing our community along. Donna Colson is here today too. Okay, so without further ado, let's go. This slide right here gives you just some basics of what the Village at Burlingame project entails. It's 132 units, 100% affordable. It's going to be split, about a 60-40 split between 60% workforce housing, 40% senior housing. And the AMI ranges 50 and 60% mostly, and it goes up to 110% AMI. It fits within the basic parameters of our downtown specific plan, so it's 5 stories, about 60 feet. And let's advance the slide. I want to give you a sense of where this is located. So for those of you who know our beautiful downtown in Burlingame, the bottom yellow line represents El Camino Real. The top yellow line represents California Drive, and blue is Burlingame Avenue. So you can see the site of this project is prime transit-oriented development housing. It's incredibly valuable real estate in Burlingame. It's literally 4/10 of a mile from the Caltrain stop, which is also highlighted in that red arrow. It is just 1 block from our downtown core. It's in our downtown core, but it's only 1 block from Burlingame Avenue, so it's very, very valuable spots. I also want to draw your attention, if you look at where the E is on the site, the word site where we're circled, there's another surface parking lot that's an important part of the story right around the letter E, and I'll tell you a little bit about that momentarily. Okay, next slide, thank you. So highlight basically 3 lessons learned during this project. Timing matters, and this is what I began by sharing with you. If you look at the timing of how it began through the planning process, of course, this project has been spoken about in council chambers since 2014, 2015, and a few times in other study sessions. But the first convening for Burlingame Talks Together About Housing was on February 10th. The second convening, April 28th. And if we go advance further, our planning commissions coincided. The first initial review was February 26th, so it was just about 2 weeks after the initial Home for All conversation. And then finally, a few months later, back in December of this past year, it was unanimously approved by our planning commission. So what Home for All, and I think at the last convening here, we had Kevin Gardner talk a little bit about the powerful impact of those community conversations. But what it really did was it really created a sense of community benefit and helped the community understand why we were doing the project. That there was intrinsic value in creating below market rate housing for the community. It helped align, there were values that came out of those conversations. The community was saying loud and clear, we are scared, we're losing our teachers, we're seeing our friends disappear. We're seeing our children's friends in the community disappear and move far away because they can't afford to live here anymore. So it could address that value. It could also address the concern that there is so much traffic on the roads. Through those conversations, people were beginning to understand, well, actually, when you build housing where people work or you build housing closer to home, people can actually maybe use public transit and get off the roads from long distances. It also, through those community conversations, it dissipated the tension around whether or not this was a good idea in the first place. And you can't underestimate that. By the time it got to planning, it was no longer a question about whether or not this was a good idea, what the mix of the units would be. It was all at planning, it was all about how are we going to make this look good? What can we do to make this work for our neighborhood? We had a great quote from one of our most well-respected planning commissioners, who's a great architect in the final planning commission, and he said in the meeting, you know, this is really a well-executed modern building. We're pleased to see this come to Burlingame. I don't think we can possibly underestimate the power also of a completely united council who is supportive of creating affordable housing on public land. Doesn't mean we agreed on every aspect of the policy. There's also a lot of devil in the details that we had a lot of robust public debate about. But there were 5 members of the city council that were 110% behind. We are going to build some below market rate housing in our downtown core on a surface parking lot, and it is going to be a good thing for the community. But that leads to community benefits, and this is the last thing I want to touch upon. Those community conversations were more than just bringing people along about why below market rate housing is important. We also had to listen to what their issues were. And if we would have failed if we hadn't addressed the concerns for open space as we urbanize, as we grow, as we increase more density in our downtown. We had to listen to the neighbors' concerns. What were their big issues about shading? How are we going to deal with privacy concerns as we suddenly create a big structure where there was nothing before except lots of sunlight and some surface parking? And then, of course, the elephant in the room that we're talking so much today is how are we going to address the parking need? When it comes to open space, this project was originally conceived that there had to be some kind of public park and open space. And so there is a small but mighty park that is part of the housing development. It's about 150 feet by 40 feet. I may have the numbers slightly off. It's been At first, it was going to have a playground, and then it actually evolved into more a passive park because the neighbors really, when we got to the nub of the matter, they were concerned a little bit about privacy and noise issues. So now it's turned into really some green space. It's going to have some beautiful lawns, some rock gardens, and some quiet places where people can sit and relax and have a little reprieve from urban life instead of a big, active park. As far as the neighbors, I think one of the most brilliant things that the developer did was hire a consultant, and a trusted consultant that's well known in our community. David Bowlby is a gentleman who helped us with our Safeway project, and for those of you who follow local politics, you may have heard about the Burlingame Safeway project years ago, but it was a long community process. He knows the community, and there was a lot of one-on-one that was done with the consultant, with the key stakeholders. Whether it was the neighborhood association in the condo building right next door that was going to really feel the brunt of the shading. Their swimming pool in the summer months is now really going to be in the shade most of the afternoon. That was a hard pill to swallow, but there were some other mitigations, right? The neighbor next door who really was concerned about a tree removal. Well, when peeled back the onion, it really was more about privacy and setbacks and noise and other issues. So that consultant, through sort of one-on-one meetings and small group community meetings, helped really pave the way for a smooth planning process because the developer took those considerations into mind. So yes, there were large community meetings in the sense of the Home for All got us there to talk about the vision. And certainly we had at the council level study sessions and other meetings along the way over a number of years. But there wasn't a special one community meeting about this project outside of the planning meetings. The planning is where the details were sort of ironed out. And then finally, the parking, and that's the last thing we'll talk about. When you talk to Burlingame residents, and as council members, we talk to a lot of Burlingame residents, when you hear one of their number one concerns that they're frustrated about and they want solved is, you can never find any parking downtown. And we've got such a great downtown, but it drives us nuts. Well, it is true. We have some parking. It's impacted at certain times of day and certain hours of the day and certain days of the week. It is something we need to address. I think there's a reasonable debate about how we address that effectively, but that is a very real concern and it can't be denied. For those of you who read my bio and you know what kind of transportation work I'm involved in the county, or you know that I'm a diehard bike ped advocate, active transportation. This is an issue that's particularly sensitive to me because everything my friend Ann at Transform just talked about, I'm a true believer. Reduced parking requirements, getting people onto public transportation, reducing parking requirements for transit-oriented development, that is like part of my kind of core compass. But in the real world, in democracy, when you're trying to get a project like this through, you have to listen to the community and you have to balance the needs of everybody. So we had to make sure that the actual housing development had enough parking to be self-sufficient, because remember, we're taking a public parking lot offline. And so that is appropriately parked. There's a puzzle stacker in it, and it meets our parking requirements. Even though they could have gotten less for density bonus, they actually parked it closer to our regular parking requirements, and that satiated some of the neighbors. The other thing that was part of the original conception of this project was to create, remember we talked about the need to create more efficiency in our parking. Part of this project includes a parking garage that will be built on an adjacent surface parking lot right behind. You remember where I showed you on the map, the letter E? So there will be a parking garage that replaces all the lost public parking and creates an additional 162 additional net new public parking spaces. That was a really important thing in Burlingame to do. Whenever we talk about that with members of our community, we get applause. Part of me goes, ugh, right? But the way that I sleep at night thinking about it is a few things. First of all, parking garages are more efficient than surface. And this is sort of 1.0. This is a great opportunity to create public benefit, below market rate housing, make it palatable to the community. We've designed the garage in such a way that it's going to be able to have lots of electric charging stations. Maybe someday it can be repurposed. And eventually, if we see that we can use our surface parking lots for higher use like this, maybe it frees up other surface parking lots when we recognize that maybe we don't need in the next 5 to 10 to 20 years as much public parking as we might have needed before, we can sort of pave the way for other opportunities on other surface parking lots for higher use. So again, I think the moral of the story is we had to, this project really does address a number of community needs, and in balance, I think it really does address and move the common good forward, and that's really what we're all trying to do in public service. So thank you for the opportunity to share Burlingame's story.
Thank you so much to our speakers. While I am introducing the next section, I'd ask the speakers to come up and take a place on the panel here. Our moderator for our panel is Roseanne Faust. Roseanne has been a leader with Home for All from the very beginning. She currently serves on our steering council, which is the governance body for Home for All. And in her spare time, she's the CEO of SAMCETA. So she does actually have a very important job in San Mateo County, and I'm happy to welcome her as moderator for the panel.
Thanks so much, Pat, and thank you all for being here today. I can't tell you how much Home for All means to me, not only as the CEO of SAMCETA, but frankly as a longtime resident of Redwood City, as a big supporter of San Mateo County. I have been telling people lately that while a lot of other folks in the Bay Area, and this means no disrespect, talk and talk and talk, we get it done in San Mateo County. We get it done time and time again. Those numbers that Peggy Jensen showed, 23,000 units of housing, folks, celebrate. Celebrate yourselves, celebrate Home for All, and celebrate our communities, because we get it done. Round of applause for all of you. So we have exactly 15 minutes to do Q&A. Your questions are coming up. I'm going to do a lightning round with a few things that I pulled out from the various speaker comments. Things that you should know about this group of 4 individuals. They are invested in getting housing built, getting good parking, having good communities. They are passionate, they are committed, they want to find solutions, they are authentic, loved that word, Serlene, and they are data-driven. You can be all of those things. Some people think you can't be passionate and data-driven. Well, you can. So I'm going to start with Serlene because she mentioned parking studies and how neighbors will say that, I don't necessarily believe the parking studies. So Serlene, to kick it off, why don't you say your thoughts about parking studies and the fact that you haven't always believed them?
No, she didn't start with the jugular. Okay, so we had a discussion about parking studies and whether, how, as proponents of a project, do we convince communities that the parking studies are right? And my response was, I don't know, because I don't always think they're right. So my example, again, it was stated earlier, to talk to people who live in the community, because you can get a true test. And someone gave the example about using an alternate street. Someone did that this morning, right? To one of the supervisors, I think it was, that said use an alternate street to get real-time modeling. So my example, the reason I don't, there are a couple of reasons, but the reason that I will share that I don't always think what engineers do, and it's not like they did it maliciously, but it's just you have the information you have is the best information you have at the time, but it's not often a lived experience. And so it's a transportation project, not really a housing project, but it's all related. There was after the earthquake, after the Loma Prieta earthquake in 1989, Caltrans was rebuilding the Cypress Freeway. Those of you who are here have been around a while, you know this. And the Caltrans engineers in Sacramento had come up with a way that the off-ramp should come down, and the off-ramp was going to come right down into what at that time we called projects. It's politically incorrect to do so, but poor people's housing and a poor people's housing development. And the off-ramp was going to come right down there, and the residents were like, you are jeopardizing our our children's lives. Somebody could lose control of the car, lose brakes, whatever, and they're like, oh, this is how it has to be. This is how it has to be for all the reasons it has to be like that. Well, there was a civil engineer who lived in the community, and he also didn't believe it had to be like that, and he came up with an alternate plan. He went home and drew, or to his office or wherever, and drew alternative plans. And I happened to be working for Caltrans, and I took those plans to the Caltrans District 4 director at the time, and he looked at them and he says, it's a little different than how we normally do things, but it's doable. And so now what you have, if you ever drive down 880 and do the little curve around that kind of takes you over the maze and down into Emeryville, there's an off-ramp at Market Street that is really a citizens designed off-ramp, and that better serves the citizens of that community. And I always use that as an example of what civic involvement can give you, as well as sometimes everything we have is not right.
Thank you, Sirlene. Elaine, I'm going to go to you. You talked about driving around neighborhoods and getting to know them from a parking perspective and circulation perspective. Can you give a little bit more detail to the audience? Because you, as Summerhill, have invested so much in so many communities on the peninsula, and you get in, you get to know the neighbors, and so tell us about some of that.
So that's exactly what we, can you hear? Is that working? So that's exactly what I find, is really important to just get into the trenches. Whether it's in someone's backyard, their front yard, in their driveway, because the more you know about the neighborhood, the more successful you're going to be. And I related some of these existing conditions. I'll use our current experiences in Burlingame are great, because we have a project in Burlingame that the City Council was very insightful in, like 10 years ago, to do an overlay over a commercial site. So they projected that this would be a great site for housing. So they were really sensitive to having a physical transition going from 2 stories up to 5 stories. So they nailed that a long time ago. But what they didn't do is they didn't update their parking code, or they're in the process of it. But so what we were faced with was parking concerns in an existing neighborhood where they were getting, all of a sudden it was this new environmental shift that was happening in their neighborhood. You talk about timing. When we were coming through the public process, it was the beginning of Uber. And there was a parking garage that had been shut down at SFO. So all of a sudden these neighbors I'm in the middle of this airport discussion, and I was like, well, have you guys talked to the city about this? No, we haven't. Well, they only let you park for 48 hours at a time, but nobody comes in tickets. So by learning that issue that had been in this neighborhood and just brewing, I was like, hey, you guys, let's meet and let's talk to staff who are very receptive. They're like, they got their public works department involved. As I explained, they got a new stop sign. So what we find is, we're building the P word, but it's so much more. It's how are we integrating into the neighborhood. The site that we're working on that's under construction right now will have a pedestrian connection right through the site right now that nobody could have experienced before. It's going to take us to a great bike bridge that is somewhat underutilized, and I think will increase the utilization. So I think, our goal is to build housing. That's what we do as a company, but what we can offer so much more is how does it integrate into the neighborhood fabric by learning and getting into the trenches, into the street. So I find it extremely valuable, and our projects always turn out better because, like I said, the neighbors know more than we ever will.
Thank you, Elaine. I'm going to go to Anne, because Anne mentioned something when we were sitting at the table this morning, and it's about preferences. And I'd like you to share your thoughts on preferences with the group. I would really encourage you to pay close attention to what Anne said.
Well, I'd love to talk about parking too right after, but the data. But no, I think just an observation of having been a councilor, planning commissioner, and kind of trotted the whole region to commissions and councils around. One of the things that I've noticed that I think would also help all of us as we are out there being ambassadors is to help name when decision makers and participants are trying to design a project for themselves when they themselves aren't actually going to be the ones living there. And I've heard time and time again where, well, if I were to live there, I wouldn't be able to do this because I have 3 cars and all my, so just, I think it's really important to separate and decouple, what's going to work for you as a decision maker. I mean, let's be honest, who can afford to come to commission and council meetings that go way into the night? It's not people who work multiple jobs. It's not people who, have even been exposed to know where to go to register their concerns at meetings that matter. And who gets to feel the entitlement of having complete comfort at a podium in front of a whole audience. It's very rare. It took me a long time myself, even as a council member. So I think it's just, let's try to get people focused on, look, this housing isn't actually for you. We want to make it work for the community as a neighborhood, but I think, and this is where developers are excellent at doing the market studies, but again, where Transform, I think we like to add value is simplify the data so it's super easy to read and access, and it's not an information overload in the way that often our EIRs and all that traffic analysis with the best intentions, it's just, the numbers are too tiny. I'm actually getting old and I'm like, I need those glasses or take my glasses off. It's, and it's onerous for folks where they're dealing with fears about the quality of their life being impinged and, again, acknowledging it, but then also pointing them to the data that exists out there. I just want to shout out James Cho from MTC is here. And at the regional level, there actually is, for the about 23 downtowns and I think 9 downtowns in San Mateo County, actual parking use mapped on block faces. So you can see in reality, what are the peak on-street parking and off-street parking uses? And what we realize is, okay, yes, there's a parking problem when you and everyone else is going to Trader Joe's at 10 a.m. on a Saturday, but the reality, there's all these other times that you can go and it's not a problem at all. So just if there's a project that you're looking at that's near one of these downtowns, if you go to regionalparking.mtc.ca.gov, regional parking database, you'll find a map there and you'll instantly see kind of red, yellow, green, what on-street parking looks like, because the parking database that Green Trip has is focused on what's off-street, so what actual projects have. And so our data that we hope to get funding for will look at both off-street and also start looking at what's happening in the quarter mile on-street in the surrounding neighborhood and really getting a sense of, are people actually owning less cars? Are they using their Clipper cards? And are they actually parking in the surrounding neighborhood? Because those are the studies that, when you see the consultant data, it's often just, it's either off-street or on-street, but often not both. So look forward to that coming from us soon.
Great. So we will get those links out. You will see them on the Home for All website. Emily, we're going to talk about the community of Burlingame. 6,000 dwelling units currently, 1,000 in the pipeline, 3,000 more planned in your general plan. You are taking a community that is 6,000 to over 4,000 additional. Talk about why you are so passionate about that.
Well, thank you for that opportunity. And really, I'm speaking on behalf of our entire council, Mayor Coulson and all council members. We get it. This is an issue we all need to tackle, and we see it as our responsibility to bring the community along. And do something bold and thoughtful. But I think what's really important to us is that we have the opportunity to use our land use authority to do it very thoughtfully in Burlingame in a way that will work well for our community, to do it thoughtfully near transit, near really robust transit. So we're adding a number of units. We're opening up a whole new neighborhood in Burlingame in the northern section of our city, which is within spitting distance of Millbrae Transit Hub. And for those of you who know the peninsula, right, Millbrae Transit Hub, planes, trains, automobiles, everything is right there. It is Mecca for transportation. That's where we should be building transit-oriented development. So we're opening up much higher density, much higher heights. We've got some policy levers in place we've put in over the last few years Just in the last 2, we've put in commercial linkage fees, below market rate affordable housing fees for developers to help us create a fund to do some of this work. We're trying to be thoughtful about it. And I hope I answered your question. We're passionate about it because we realize we all have to contribute. We can't solve the entire Bay Area region's problems all in any one individual city, but we all have a responsibility, particularly if we have land that's well suited for transit-oriented development housing, to build it smart. Because as we grow and as we urbanize, we have to do it thoughtfully and in the right places. And that's where I think local elected officials that have the right values, who are aligned, who are trying to do the right thing, can really do it best for every community.
So we have a lot of questions. I'm going to ask for kind of a 30-second lightning round, because as a moderator, if I don't give you a break, you will hang me out to dry. So 30 seconds, folks, and I'm going to combine 2 questions. There's a lot of communities who have online social media platforms where things can turn very negative. So keep that in mind when you're answering this question. But how do you frame the people versus parking values discussion? Asking the community, do we care more about places for people to live, or do we care more about where their cars can live? So in thinking about the online where this can all turn ugly, so I'm combining, literally 30 seconds, and then anyone who had a particular question for the panel, if you could just come up, stay around, ask the questions, we'll make sure that we get them to them.
I'll take that a little bit as an elected that, is sensitive to next door. That's the real world we live in now. I think the biggest people over cars, prioritizing people over automobiles. And I think one of the ways to very briefly respond to it is show the benefit when we do prioritize people over cars. So when we make more room for bike lanes, we slow traffic down, everybody gets safer, we create opportunities for people who want to make that choice to use active transportation, whether it's walking or bicycling. We take, it's like the Columbus Day effect, take 3 to 5% of the congestion off the roads, it feels like 50% less cars, MTC's study, right? So you make more room for people to have alternatives or use public transportation, there's less congestion on the roads, and there's more parking spaces available for the people who really need them. So I think it's a win-win for everybody to start talking about prioritizing people through all modes of transportation and housing over automobiles.
Yeah, that's our tagline, trying to support housing for people before cars. And the stat that I like to share is on a national level, there's actually, 7 homes for every car. And we have a deficit of housing for people. And if, and as a region, we're seeing how is this disparity of wealth and this skyrocketing homelessness. So it's, that's really what we're trying to frame it from that level. And again, yeah, same benefits, focusing on actually, I'll say in El Cerrito, my hometown, we have 2 BART stations. And very proud that our council, same thing, we're lucky to have a, smart growth majority over the last decade. It wasn't always the case, but we want to see development at those BART stations, and we're faced with, do we get rid of all the parking there? How much do we actually have to replace? And it turns out the city has an old library that is still there from when I was there as a kid. Do we build a parking garage for 200 car parking spaces, or do we get, for the same price, $20 million, get a new library? So again, I think the more we can get nimble with framing the cost of parking versus cost of all these other things we would love to have, it becomes really clear and really compelling, in my opinion.
Did you all get a chance?
I just want to point out that on the people versus parking, we're seeing a generational shift on our consumer side. The younger generation is putting people ahead of parking, and they're making choices to live in certain locations that their priority is to be able to walk and have a fun place to live. So we're going to see it, we're all in the room, but we're going to see it regardless, because they think it's more important. And we're actually, it's unpopular to have too much parking in your building now from this younger generation. They're like, why do you guys have all this parking? It's a waste. That's the feedback we're getting.
Let's give our panel a rousing thank you. And thanks too to Roseanne for moderating the questions. We do have more questions than certainly we have time to address. We're going to share with the panelists those that are questions that are directed towards individuals, and they'll hopefully be available during the break, perhaps, to, after you've had a little break, talk with people that have specific questions. We'll also try to provide answers to those that we can following this meeting on our website, but we'll let you know about that. So we have about 5 minutes at your tables. I'm going to ask the facilitators to perhaps do the first go-around question, and then we'll take the break right after that.